Hello. I almost looked the wrong place because I've moved the webcam. This feels weird, but hello. Let's see. Okay, looks like everything's working. Still fixing some issues with the stream setup, but I think we're good to go for today. Hello, Lobsol. Loving the icon. Let me see if this... Yeah, there we go. So we are back with the Silmarillion. Wait a minute. Oh no. We have two. Why do we have two? Go away. That's not what I wanted. Damn it. There we go. Okay, for some reason we had two. Hello, Leon. Hello, Lobsol. Welcome, welcome. I'm still looking. I keep looking at the wrong place for the camera. That's going to take a while to get used to. So we're back with of Hurin to Rambar, which is one of Tolkien's kind of epic adventure story things. Hello, Atris, welcome. He is fighting orcs and dragons and bad guys, and has been separated from his mother and his father and his sister. And last time, he accidentally got his best friend murdered. His elf friend Beleg. He had been kidnapped by orcs, and Beleg came to save him. He mistook him for an enemy and stabbed. So that is just one of many terrible and sad decisions that our good friend Hurin is going to be making. We are starting where Beleg had just died, and another elf, I believe, a Gwyndor, had come with Beleg to try and help out. So now Gwyndor and Hurin are on the run to get away right after Beleg had just died. They arose, and departing from Ethel Ivrin, they journeyed southward along the banks of Nerog, until they were taken by scouts of the elves, and brought as prisoners to the hidden stronghold. Thus did Hurin come to Nargothrond. At first his own people did not know Gwyndor, who went out young and strong, and returned now seeming as one of the aged among mortal men, because of his torments and his labors. But Findulis, daughter of Orodreth of the king, knew him and welcomed him, for she had loved him before the Nernieth, and so greatly did Gwyndor love her beauty that he named her Feilivrin, which is the gleam of the sun on the pools of Ivrin. For Gwyndor's sake, Hurin was admitted with him into Nargothrond, and he dwelt there in honor. But when Gwyndor would tell his name, Hurin checked him, saying, "I am Agarwen, the son of Umarth, which is the blood-stained son of ill fate, a hunter in the woods," and the elves of Nargothrond questioned him no more. In the time that followed, Hurin grew high in favor with Orodreth, and well-nigh all hearts were turned to him in Nargothrond, for he was young, and only now reached his full manhood, and he was in truth the son of Morwen Aledwen to look upon, dark-haired and pale skin with grey eyes, and his face more beautiful than any other among mortal men in the elder days. His speech and bearing were that of the ancient kingdom of Doriath, and even among the elves he might be taken for one from the great houses of the Noldor. Therefore many called him Adanidel, the elf man. That's so funny. You're a man, but you look and you act like an elf, so we will call you Elfman. What a great nickname. The sword Anglachel was forged anew for him by cunning smiths of Nargothrond, and though ever black, its edges shone with pale fire, and he named it Gurthang, Iron of Death. So great was his prowess and skill in warfare on the confines of the guarded plain, that he himself became known as Mormagil, the Black Sword, and the elves said, "The Mormagil cannot be slain save by mischance or an evil arrow from afar." All these people have too many names. They need to stop that. Then the heart of Findulis was turned from Gwyndor, and against her will her love was given to Hurin. But Hurin did not perceive what had befallen. And being torn in heart, Findulis became sorrowful, and she grew wan and silent. But Gwyndor sat in dark thought. And on a time he spoke to Findulis, saying, "Daughter of the house of Finarfin, let no grief lie between us. For though Morgoth has laid my life in ruin, you still I love. Go whither love leads you, yet beware, it is not fitting that the elder children of Iluvatar should wed with the younger, nor is it wise, for they are brief and soon pass, to leave us in widowhood while the world lasts. Neither will fate suffer it, unless it be once or twice only, for some high cause of doom that we do not perceive. But this man is not barren. A doom indeed lies on him, as seeing eyes may well read in him. A dark doom. Enter not into it, and if you will, your love shall betray you to bitterness and death. For hearken to me, though he be indeed a Garwin, son of Umarth, his right name is Turin, son of Hurin, whom Morgoth holds in Angband, and whose kin he has cursed. Doubt not the power of Morgoth Bauglir. Is it not written in me? Have you ever gone to your crush, who also has a crush on your friend, and said, "Listen, I give you leave to love him, yet beware the doom upon him"? You should try it, see if it works. Then Findulis sat long in thought, but at last she said only, "Turin, son of Hurin, loves me not, nor will." Now when Turin learned from Findulis of what had passed, he was wrathful, and said to Gwyndor, "In love I hold you for rescue and safekeeping, but now you have done ill to me, friend, to betray my right name and call my doom upon me, from which I would lie hid." But Gwyndor answered, "The doom lies in yourself, not in your name." When it became known to Orodreth that the Mormagil was in truth the son of Hurin, Thalion, he gave him great honor, and Turin became mighty among the people of Nargothrond. But he had no liking for their manner of warfare, of ambush and stealth and secret arrow, and he yearned for the brave strokes and battle in the open. And his counsels weighed with the king, ever the longer the more. In those days, the elves of Nargothrond forsook their secrecy and went openly into battle, and great store of weapons were made. And by the counsel of Turin, the Noldor built a mighty bridge over the Narog from the doors of Felagund, for the swifter passage of their arms. Then the servants of Angband were driven out of all the land between Narog and Sirion eastward, and westward to the Nenning and the desolate Falas. And though Gwyndor spoke ever against Turin in the council of the king, holding it an ill policy, he fell into dishonor, and none heeded him, for his strength was small, and he was no longer forward in arms. Thus Nargothrond was revealed to the wrath and hatred of Morgoth. But still, at Turin's prayer, his true name was not spoken, and though the fame of his deeds came into Doriath to the ears of Thingol, rumor spoke only of the black sword of Nargothrond. So, dumb impatient child said, "Hey, I want to go fight the orcs out there!" And they said, "Okay, fine, we like you." And because of that, now Morgoth is aware where they are. He's got an idea of where to find them. Hey, Daniel, welcome. If only the fool had been patient. In that time of respite and hope, when because of the deeds of the Mormagil, the power of Morgoth was stemmed west of Sirion, Morwen fled at last from Dor-Lomin with Nenyor, her daughter, and adventured the long journey to Thingol's halls. In case you've lost track, Morwen is Turin's mom, Nenyor is his sister, and they lived separately because they had sent him ahead trying to save him and get him away from the bad guys. So now they are finally going south to safety. There new grief awaited her, for she found Turin gone, and to Doriath there had come no tidings since the Dragonhelm had vanished from the lands west of Sirion. But Morwen remained in Doriath with Nenyor as guests of Thingol and Melian, and were treated with honor. Now it came to pass, when 495 years had passed since the rising of the moon, in the spring of the year, there came to Nargothrond 2 elves, named Gelmir and Arminas. They were of Angrod's people, but since the Dagor Bragollach they dwelt in the south with Círdan the shipwright. From their far journeys they brought tidings of a great mustering of orcs and evil creatures under the eaves of Eredwethrin and in the pass of Sirion, and they told also that Ulmo had come to Círdan, giving warning that the great peril drew nigh to Nargothrond. "Hear the words of the Lord of Waters," they said to the king. Thus he spoke to Círdan the shipwright. The evil of the north has defiled the springs of Sirion, and my power withdraws from the fingers of the flowing waters. But a worse thing is yet to come forth. Say therefore to the Lord of Nagathron, shut the doors of the fortress and go not abroad. Cast the stones of your pride into the loud river, that the creeping evil may not find the gate. Orodreth was troubled by the dark words of the messengers, but Hurin would by no means hearken to these counsels, and least of all would he suffer the great bridge to be cast down, for he was become proud and stern, and would order all things as he wished. Soon afterwards, Handir, lord of Brethel, was slain, for the orcs invaded his land, and Handir gave them battle. But the men of Brethel were worsted and driven back into their woods. And in the autumn of the year, biding his hour, Morgoth loosed upon the people of Nerog the great host he had long prepared, and Glaurung the Iruloki passed over Anfauglith. Gaulrung is the big dragon. Came thence into the north vales of Sirion, and there did great evil. Under the shadows of Eredwethrin he defiled the Ethel Ivrin, and thence he passed into the realm of Nargothrond, and burned the Talith Dirnan, the guarded plain, between Nerog and Teglin. Then the warriors of Nargothrond went forth, and tall and terrible on that day looked Turin, and the heart of the host was upheld, as he rode on the right hand of Orodreth. But greater far was the host of Morgoth than any scouts had told. And none but Turin, defended by his Dwarfmass, could withstand the approach of Glaurung. And the elves were driven back and pressed by the orcs into the field of Tumhalad, between Ginglith and Nerog, and there they were penned. On that day all the pride and host of Nargothrond withered away, and Orodreth was slain in the foremost of battle, and Gwyndor son of Gullion was wounded to the death. But Turin came to his aid, and all fled before him, and he bore Gwyndor out of the rout, and escaping into a wood, laid him there on the grass. Hey, Phil! You've arrived in time for stupid people to do stupid things. Gwyndor said to Turin, let bearing pay for bearing, but ill-fated was mine, and vain is thine. For my body is marred beyond healing, and I must leave Middle-earth. And though I love thee, son of Hurin, yet I rue the day I took thee from the orcs. But for thy prowess and thy pride, still I should have love and life, and Nargothrond should yet stand a while. Now if thou love me, leave me. Haste thee to Nargothrond, and save Findulis. And this last I say to thee, she alone stands between thee and thy doom. If thou fail her, it shall not fail to find thee. Farewell. Hey, you big idiot. You got us all killed. Now go save my girlfriend before you cursed and die. Then Turin sped back to Nargothrond, mustering such of the rout as was met with on the way, and the leaves fell from the trees in a great wind as they went, for the autumn was passing to a dire winter. But the hosts of the orcs and Glaurung the dragon were there before him, and they came suddenly, ere those that were left on guard were aware of what had befallen on the field of Tumhalad. In that day the bridge over Nerog proved an evil, for it was great and mightily made, and could not be swiftly destroyed, and the enemy came readily over the deep river, and Gaulrung came in full fire against the doors of Felagund, and overthrew them, and passed within. And even as Turin came up, the dreadful sack of Nargothrond was well nigh achieved. The orcs had slain or driven off all that remained in arms, and were even then ransacking the great halls and chambers, plundering and destroying. But those of the women and maidens that were not burned or slain, they had herded on the terraces before the doors, as slaves to be taken into Morgoth's thraldom. Upon this ruin and woe Turin came, and none could withstand him. I forgot I had a picture of the dragon, my bad. Or they would not, though he struck down all before him, and passed over the bridge, and hewed his way towards the captives. And now he stood alone, for the few that followed him had fled. But in that moment Gaulrung issued from the gaping doors, and lay behind between Turin and the bridge. Then suddenly he spoke by the evil spirit that was in him, saying, Hail, son of Hurin, well met. Then Turin sprang about and strode against him, and the edges of Gurthang shone as with flame. But Galrung held his blast and opened wide his serpent eyes and gazed upon Turin. Without fear, Turin looked into them as he raised up the sword, and straightway he fell under the binding spell of the lidless eyes of the dragon, and was halted moveless. I'm not afraid. I'll stare at the dragon. Oh, I fucked up. Again. I keep fucking up. Why do I keep doing this? Galrung spoke again, taunting Turin, and he said, Evil have been all thy ways, son of Hurin, thankless fosterling, outlaw, slayer of thy friend, thief of love, usurper of Nargothrond, captain foolhardy, and deserter of thy kin. As thralls thy mother and thy sister live in Dorloman, in misery and want. Thou art arrayed as a prince, but they go in rags, and for thee they yearn. But thou carest not for that. Glad may thy father be to learn that he hath such a son, as learn he shall. And Turin, being under the spell of Glaurung, hearkened to his words, and he saw himself as in a mirror misshapen by malice, and loathed that which he saw. And while he was yet held by the eyes of the dragon in torment of mind, and could not stir, the orcs drove away the herded captives, and they passed nigh to Turin and crossed over the bridge. Among them was Findulis, and she cried out to Turin as she went. But not until her cries and the wailing of the captives was lost upon the northward road did Galrung release Turin, and he might not stop his ears against that voice that haunted him thereafter. Hey, Cygnus? Who doesn't get lost staring into a dragon's eyes? Not this dragon. Suddenly, Glaurung withdrew his glance and waited, and Turin stirred slowly as one waking from a hideous dream. Then, coming to himself, he sprang upon the dragon with a cry. But Glaurung laughed, saying, If thou wilt be slain, I will slay thee gladly. But small help will that be to Morwen and Nenyor. No heed didst thou give to the cries of the elf-woman. Wilt thou deny also the bond of thy blood? But Turin, drawing back his sword, stabbed at the dragon's eyes, and Galrung, coiling back, swiftly towered above him, and said, Nay, at least thou art valiant, beyond all whom I have met. And they lie who say that we of our part do not honor the valor of our foes. I keep reading the next sentence instead of the one I'm reading. See now, I offer thee freedom. Go to thy kin, if thou canst. Get thee gone, and if elf or man be left to make tales of these days, then surely in scorn they will name thee, if thou spurn'st this gift. Then Turin, being yet bemused by the eyes of the dragon, as were he treating with a foe he could not pity. He that could no pity. I need new glasses. Believed the words of Galrung, and turning away he sped over the bridge. But as he went, Galrung spoke behind him, saying in a fell voice, Haste thee now, son of Hurin, to Dorloman, or perhaps the orcs shall come before thee once again. And if thou tarry for Findulis, then never shalt see Morwen again, and never at all shalt thou see Nenyor thy sister, and they will curse thee. He never met his sister. She was born after he left. That's why they're talking about that. Turin passed away on the northward road, and Galrung laughed once more, for he had accomplished the errand of his master. Then he turned to his own pleasure, and sent forth his blast, and burned all about him. But all the orcs that were busy in the sack he routed forth, and drove them away, and denied them their plunder, even to the last thing of worth, the bridge that he broke down, and cast into the foam of Narog. And being thus secure, he gathered all the hoards and riches of Felagund, and heaped them, and lay upon them in the innermost hall, and rested a while. Turin hastened along the ways to the north, through the lands now desolate between Narog and Taglin, and the fell winter came down to meet him. For in that year snow fell ere autumn was past, and spring came late and cold. Ever to him... I may need to go and get my eyes checked. Either that, or maybe I need to brighten this room up. That's probably what it is. Let's see if I can get this closer. Oh, geez, that's bright. Oh, that's bright. Oh, well, let's see if it helps. Ever it seemed to him as he went that he heard the cries of Findulis calling his name by wood and hill, and great was his anguish. But his heart being hot with the lies of Galrung, and seeing ever in his mind the orcs burning the house of Hurin, or putting Morwen and Nenyor to torment, he held on his way and never turned aside. So the dragon lied about his family still being back where they were, and that the orcs are coming for him. They're safe. He doesn't know that, but they are. Still, thinking that they're in danger, he still goes to try and save Findulis to keep his promise to his dead friend? They were kind of friends. At last, worn by haste and the long road, for 40 leagues and more he had journeyed without rest, he came with the first ice of winter to the pools of Ivren, where before he had been healed, but they were now a frozen mire, and he could drink there no more. Thus he came hardly by the passes of Dorloman, through bitter snows from the north, and found again the land of his childhood. Bare and bleak it was, and Morwen was gone. Her house stood empty, broken, and cold, and no living thing dwelt nigh. Wait, okay. Okay, so he didn't go after Findulis. He went for his family that he was told were being attacked, but they're no longer there. So that's what he did. Her house stood empty, broken, and cold, and no living thing dwelt nigh. Therefore Turin departed, and came to the house of Broda the Easterling, he that had to wife Erin, Hurin's kinswoman. And there he learned of an old servant that Morwen was long gone, for she had fled with Nenyor out of Dorloman. None but Erin knew where. Then Turin strode to Broda's table, and seizing him, drew his sword, and demanded that he be told whither Morwen had gone. What a great way. Such a diplomat. Bye, Phil. Thanks for joining us. Erin declared to him she went to Doriath to seek her son, for the lands were freed then from evil, she said, by the black sword of the south, who has now fallen, they say. Then Turin's eyes were opened, and the last threads of Galrong's spell were loosed. And for anguish and wrath at the lies that had deluded him, and hatred of the oppressors of Morwen, a black rage seized him, and he slew Broda in his hall, and other Easterlings that were his guest. Thereafter he fled out into the winter a hunted man, but he was aided by some that remained of Hador's people, and knew the ways of the wild. And with them he escaped through the falling snow, and came to an outlaw's refuge in the southern mountains of Dorloman. Sometimes it's really hard to remember why this guy is supposed to be a hero. Thence Turin passed again from the land of his childhood, and returned to Sirian's Vale. His heart was bitter, for to Dorloman he had brought only greater woe upon the remnant of his people, and they were glad of his going. And this comfort alone he had, that by the prowess of the black sword the ways to Doriath had been laid open to Morwen. You didn't have to murder those people, dude. If you're so sad about it. Hey, Gotski. He said in his thought, those deeds wrought not evil to all, and where else might I have better bestowed my kin, even had I come sooner? For if the girdle of Melian be broken, then last hope is ended. Nay, it is better indeed as things be, for a shadow I cast wheresoever I come. Let Melian keep them, and I will leave them in peace unshadowed for a while. Now Turin, coming down from arid Wethrin, sought for Findulis in vain, roaming the woods beneath the mountains, wild and wary as a beast, and he waylaid all the roads that went north to the pass of Sirion, but he was too late, for all the trails had grown cold or were washed away by the winter. Yet thus it was that, passing southwards towards Teglin, Turin came upon some of the men of Brethel that were surrounded by orcs, and he delivered them, for the orcs fled from Gurthrang. He named himself Wildman of the Woods, and they besought him to come and dwell with them. But he said that he had an errand yet unachieved, to seek Findulis, Orodreth's daughter of Nargothrond. Then Dorlas, the leader of those woodmen, told the grievous tidings of her death. For the men of Brethel had waylaid at the crossings of Teglin the orc host that led the captives of Nargothrond, hoping to rescue them. But the orcs had at once cruelly slain their prisoners, and Findulis they pinned to a tree with a spear. So she died, saying at the last, "Tell the Mormagil that Findulas is here." Therefore they laid her in a mound near that place, and called it Haud an Eleth, mound of the elf maid. Turin bade them lead him thither, and there he fell down into a darkness of grief that was near death. Then Dorlas, by his black sword, the fame whereof had come even into the deeps of Brethil, and by his quest of the king's daughter, knew that this wild man was indeed the Mormegil of Nargothrond, whom rumour said was the son of Hurin of Dorloman. Therefore the woodsmen lifted him up and bore him away to their homes. Now those were set in a stockade upon a high place in the forest, Ethel Brandir upon Amon Obel, for the people of Haleth were now dwindled by war. And Brandir, son of Handir, who ruled them, was a man of gentle mood, and lame also from childhood, and he trusted rather in secrecy than in deeds of war to save them from the power of the north. Therefore he feared the tidings that Dorlas brought, and when he beheld the face of Turin as he lay on the bier, a cloud of foreboding lay on his heart. This is a smart guy. Nonetheless, being moved by his woe, he took him into his house and tended him, for he had skill in healing. And with the beginning of spring, Turin cast off his darkness and grew hale again. And he arose, and he thought he would remain in Brethil hidden, and put his shadow behind him, forsaking the past. He took therefore a new name, Turambar, which in the high elven speech signified Master of Doom. This guy's got like 12,000 names. Hey, Jeff. Which in high elven speech signified Master of Doom, and he besought the woodmen to forget that he was a stranger among them, or ever bore any other name. Nonetheless, he would not wholly leave deeds of war, for he could not endure that the orcs should come to the crossings of Teglin, or draw nigh to Hod and Eleth, and he made that a place of dread for them, so that they shunned it. But he laid his black sword by, and wielded rather the sword and the spear. Now new tidings came to Doriath concerning Nargothrond, for some that had escaped from the defeat and the sack, and had survived the fell winter in the wild, came at last to Thingol seeking refuge. And the march wardens brought them to the king. And some said that all the enemy had withdrawn northwards, and others that Galrung abode still in the halls of Felagund. And some said that the Mormegil was slain, and others that he was cast under a spell by the dragon and dwelt there yet, as one changed to stone. But all declared that it was known to many in Nargothrond ere the end, that the Mormegil was none other than Turin, son of Hurin of Dorloman. Then Morwen was distraught, and refusing the counsel of Melian, she rode forth alone into the wild to seek her son, or some true tidings of him. Thingol therefore sent Mablung after her with many hardy march wardens, to find her and guard her, and to learn what news they might. But Nenyor was bidden to remain behind, yet the fearlessness of her house was hers, and in an evil hour, in hope that Morwen would return when she saw that her daughter would go with her into peril, Nenyor disguised herself as one of Thingol's people, and went with that ill-fated riding. They came upon Morwen by the banks of Sirion, and Mablung besought her to return to Menegroth, but she was fey and would not be persuaded. Then also the coming of Nenyor was revealed, and despite Morwen's command she would not go back. And Mablung perforce brought them to the hidden ferries at the Mares of Twilight, and they passed over Sirion. And after 3 days' journeying they came to Amon Aether, the Hill of Spies, that long ago Felagund had caused to be raised with great labor, a league before the doors of Nargothrond. There Mablung set a guard of riders about Morwen and her daughter, and forbade them to go further. But he, seeing from the hill no sign of any enemy, went down with his scouts to the Narog as stealthily as they could go. Hello, Iliani? I hope I'm saying that right. Thanks for joining us. Let's see here. I am doing pretty good, thanks. Alright. Galrung was aware of all they did, and he came forth in heat of wrath, and lay into the river. And a vast vapor and foul reek went up, in which Mablung and his company were blinded and lost. Then Galrung passed east over Narog. Seeing the onset of the dragon, the guards upon Amon Aether sought to lead Morwen and Nenyor away, and fly with them with all speed back eastwards. But the wind bore the blank mists upon them, and their horses were maddened by the dragon stench, and were ungovernable. and ran this way and that, so that some were dashed against trees and were slain, and others were borne far away. Thus the ladies were lost, and of Morwen indeed no sure tidings came to Doriath after. But Nenyor, being thrown by her steed, yet unhurt, made her way back to Amon Ether, there to await Mablung, and came thus above the reek into the sunlight, and looking westward she stared straight into the eyes of Galrung, whose head lay upon the hilltop. Who, when they're running away from a dragon, thinks, "Oh, I don't want to lose my group, let's go back to the hill where the dragon is"? Her will strove with him for a while, but he put forth his power, and having learned who she was, he constrained her to gaze into his eyes, and he laid a spell of utter darkness and forgetfulness upon her, so that she could remember nothing that had ever befallen her, nor her own name, nor the name of any other thing. And for many days she could not hear, nor see, nor stir by her own will. Galrung left her standing alone upon Amon Ether, and went back to Nargothrond. Now Mablung, who greatly daring had explored the halls of Felagund when Galrung left them, fled from them at the approach of the dragon, and returned to Amon Ether. The sun sank and night fell as he climbed the hill, and he found none there save Nenyor, standing alone under the stars as an image of stone. No word she spoke or heard, but would follow if he took her hand. Therefore, in great grief, he led her away, though it seemed to him in vain, for they were both like to perish, succorless in the wild. They were found by 3 of Mablung's companions, and slowly they journeyed northward and eastward towards the fences of the land of Doriath beyond Sirion, and the guarded bridge nigh to the inflowing of Escalduin. Slowly the strength of Nenyor returned as they drew nearer to Doriath, but still she could not speak or hear, and walked blindly as she was led. But even as they drew near the fences, at last she closed her staring eyes and would sleep, and they laid her down and rested also, unheedfully, for they were utterly outworn. There they were assailed by an orc band, such as now roamed often at night the fences of Doriath as they dared. But Nenyor in that hour recovered hearing and sight, and being awakened by the cries of the orcs, she sprang up in terror and fled ere they could come to her. The orcs gave chase, and the elves after, and they overtook the orcs and slew them ere they could harm her. But Nenyor escaped them, for she fled as in a madness of fear, swifter than a deer, and tore off all her clothing as she ran until she was naked. Sorry, why? Oh god, oh no! Just throwing your bra at the orcs, hoping that'll slow them down? Tolkien, why? Given this is based off of a specific myth, I wonder if that's something he picked up from the myth it's based on. I don't know enough about it. I'm gonna have to read that myth to tie it to all this. Nenyor ran on into the woods until she was spent, and then fell and slept and awoke. And it was a sunlit morning, and she rejoiced in light as it were a new thing, and all things else that she saw seemed new and strange, for she had no names for them. Nothing did she remember save a darkness that lay behind her, and a shadow of fear. Therefore she went warily as a hunted beast, and became famished, for she had no food, and knew not how to seek it. But coming at last to the crossings of Taglin, she passed over, seeking the shelter of the great trees of Brethel, for she was afraid, and it seemed to her that the darkness was overtaking her again from which she had fled. But it was a great storm of thunder that came up from the south, and in terror she cast herself down upon the mound of Haud and Elith, stopping her ears from the thunder. But the rain smote her and drenched her, and she lay like a wild beast that is dying. There Tarambar found her, as he came to the crossings of Taglin, having heard rumor of orcs that roamed near, and seeing in a flare of lightning the body, as it seemed, of a slain maiden lying upon the mound of Findulis, he was stricken to the heart. But the woodman lifted her up, and Tarambar cast his cloak about her, and they took her to a lodge nearby, and warmed her, and gave her food. And as soon as she looked upon Tarambar, she was comforted, for it seemed to her she had found at last something she had sought in her darkness, and she would not be parted from him. But when he asked her concerning her name and her kin and her misadventure, then she became troubled as a child that perceives something is demanded that cannot be understood, and she wept. Therefore Tarambar said, "Do not be troubled, the tale shall wait, but I will give you a name, and call you Ninyal, Tear Maiden." And at that name she shook her head, but said, "Ninyal." That was the first word she spoke after her darkness, and it remained her name among the woodmen ever after. On the next day they bore her towards Ethelbrandir. But when they came to Dimrost, the rainy stair, where the tumbling stream of Celebros fell toward Teglin, a great shuddering came upon her, wherefore afterwards the place was called Nen Girith, the shuddering water. Ere she came to the home of the woodmen upon Amon Obel, she was sick with a fever, and long she lay thus, tended by the women of Brethel, and they taught her language as to an infant. But ere the autumn came, by the skill of Brandir she was healed of her sickness, and she could speak. But nothing did she remember of the time before she was found by Tarambar. Brandir loved her, but all her heart was given to Tarambar. Unfortunate. In that time the woodmen were not troubled by the orcs, and Tarambar went not to war, and there was peace in Brethel. His heart turned to Ninyal, and he asked her in marriage, but for that time she delayed in spite of her love. For Brandir foreboded he knew not what, and sought to restrain her, rather for her sake than his own. And he revealed to her that Tarambar was Turin's son of Hurin, and though she knew not the name, a shadow fell upon her mind. But when 3 years were past since the sack of Nargothrond, Tarambar asked Ninyal again, and vowed that now he would wed her or else go back to war in the wild. And Ninyal took him with joy, and they were wedded at midsummer, and the woodsmen of Brethel made a great feast. But ere the end of the year, Glaurung sent orcs of his dominion against Brethel, and Tarambar sat at home deedless, for he had promised to Ninyal he would go to battle only if their homes were assailed. But the woodsmen were worsted, and Dorlas upbraided him that he would not aid the people he had taken for his own. Then Tarambar arose and brought forth again his black sword, and he gathered a great company of the men of Brethel, and they defeated the orcs utterly. But Galrung heard tidings the black sword was in Brethel, and he pondered what he heard, devising new evil. Why couldn't you just use a different sword? Oh, people having buffering problems? It may be the hurricanes. I've heard a lot of people have been having issues with that lately, unfortunately. In the spring of the year after Ninyal conceived, she became wan and sad, and at the same time there came to Ethelbrandir the first rumors that Galrung had issued from Nargothrond. Tarambar sent scouts far afield, for now he ordered things as he would, and few gave heed to Brandir. As it drew near to summer, Glaurung came to the borders of Brethel, and lay near the west shores of Teglin, and then there was great fear among the woodfolk, for it was now plain the great worm would assail and ravage their land, and not pass by, returning to Angband as they had hoped. They sought therefore the counsel of Tarambar, and he counselled them it was vain to go against Glaurung with all their force, for only by cunning and good fortune could they defeat him. He offered therefore himself to seek the dragon on the borders of the land, and bade the rest of the people to remain at Ethelbrandir, but to prepare for flight. For if Galrung had the victory, he would come first to the woodsmen's homes and destroy them, and they could not hope to withstand them. But if they scattered far and wide, many might escape, for Glaurung would not take up his dwelling in Brethel, and would soon return to Nargothrond. Then Tarambar asked for companions willing to aid him in his peril, and Dorlas stood forth, but no others. Therefore Dorlas upbraided the people, and spoke scorn of Brandir, who could not play the part of the heir of the house of Halath. And Brandir was shamed before his people, and was bitter at heart. And Hunthor, kinsman of Brandir, asked leave to go in his stead. Then Tarambar said farewell to Ninyal, and she was filled with fear and foreboding, and their parting was sorrowful. But Tarambar set out with his 2 companions, and went to Nen Girith. Everybody's having issues? Let's see. It says I'm connected. It may be I don't know how all this stuff works, but maybe it's something to do with, server locations near the hurricane? I don't know. I really don't know anything about the internet and how it works, but I do know that, like, everybody I know in the southeast of the United States has been having trouble lately. Unfortunately. Yeah, it doesn't look like my connection's bad on my side. That stinks. I don't know that I can actually... Yeah, it says I'm fine. I don't know. I'll look more into it later and see if there's something I can do to help it out. Oh, thank you, Daniel. Ninyel, being unable to endure her fear and unwilling to wait in the Ethel tidings of Turambar's fortune, set forth after him, and a great company went with her. At this Brandir was filled all the more with dread, and he sought to dissuade her and the people that would go with her from this rashness, but they heeded him not. Therefore he renounced his lordship and all love for the people that had scorned him, and having not left but his love for Ninyel, he girt himself with a sword and went after her, but being lame fell far behind. This one poor dude is way cooler than our hero. This poor guy. Turambar came to Nen Girith at sundown, and there he learned that Galrung lay on the brink of the high shores of Teglin, and was like to move when night fell. Then he called those tidings good, for the dragon lay at Kabid en Eras, where the river ran in a deep and narrow gorge that a hunted deer might overleap. And Turambar thought he would seek no further, but would attempt to pass over the gorge. Therefore he proposed to creep down at dusk, and descend into the ravine under night, and cross over the wild water, and then to climb up the further cliff, and so come down to the dragon beneath his guard. This counsel he took, but the heart of Dorlas failed when they came to the races of Teglin in the dark, and he dared not attempt the perilous crossing, but drew back and lurked in the woods, burdened with shame. Turambar and Hunthor nonetheless crossed over in safety, for the loud roaring of the water drowned all other sounds, and Galrung slept. Ere the middle night, the dragon roused, and with a great noise and blast cast his forward part across the chasm, and began to draw his bulk after. Turambar and Hunthor were well nigh overcome by the heat and the stench, as they sought in haste for a way to come up to Glaurung, and Hunthor was slain by a great stone that was dislodged from on high by the passage of the dragon, and smote him on the head and cast him into the river. So he had ended, of the house of Haleth not the least valiant. Oh, I hope that helps. I remember being on those. What days? Having a brain. Turambar summoned all his will and courage, and climbed the cliff alone, and came beneath the dragon. Then he drew Gurthang, and with all the might of his arm and of his hate, he thrust it into the soft belly of the worm, even up to the hilts. But when Glaurung felt his death pang, he screamed, and in his dreadful throe he heaved up his bulk and hurled himself across the chasm, and there lay lashing and coiling in his agony. And he set all in a blaze about him, and beat all to ruin, until at last his fires died, and he lay still. Yes, so what happened is the dragon was sleeping on one side of a canyon that he would have to cross to get to the good guys. So Turin said, okay, the belly's the weakest part, which the picture shows. He climbs down into the ravine to come up under the dragon when the dragon's crossing over and stab him in the guts. I think this part I do remember being in quite a few different myths. There's like a Norse myth about how a dragon's killed by a guy stabbing him from a hole underneath him. I think that happens in the Finn version too. There's a lot of stories about sneaking under a dragon and stabbing him. Now Gurthang had been wrested from Turambar's hand in the throw of Galrung, and it clave to the belly of the dragon. Turambar therefore crossed the water once more, desiring to recover his sword and look upon his foe, and he found him stretched at his length, rolled upon one side, and the hilt of Gurthang stood in his belly. Then Turambar seized the hilt and set his foot upon the belly, and cried in mockery of the dragon and his words at Nargothrond. Hail, worm of Morgoth, well met again. Die now, and the darkness have thee. Thus is Turin, son of Hurin, avenged. He wrenched out the sword, but a spout of black blood followed it, and fell on his hand, and the venom burned it. And thereupon Galrung opened his eyes, and looked upon Turambar with such malice that it smote him as a blow. And by that stroke, and the anguish of the venom, he fell into a dark swoon, and lay as one dead, and his sword was beneath him. The screams of Galrung rang in the woods, and came to the people that waited at Nen Girith. And when those that looked forth heard them, and saw afar the ruin and burning the dragon made, they deemed he had triumphed, and was destroying those that assailed him. And Ninyel sat and shuddered beside the falling water, and at the voice of Galrung her darkness crept upon her again, so that she could not stir from that place of her own worth. Even so Brandir found her, for he came to Nengirith at last, limping wearily, and when he heard the dragon had crossed the river and beaten his foes, his heart yearned towards Nunyel in pity. Yet he thought also, Tarambar is dead, but Ninyel lives. Now it may be she will come with me, and I will lead her away, and we may escape the dragon together. After a while, therefore, he stood by Ninyel, and he said, Come, it is time to go. If you will, I will lead you. And when he took her hand, she rose silently and followed him, and in the darkness none saw them go. But as they went down the path to the crossings, the moon rose and cast a grey light on the land, and Ninyel said, Is this the way? And Brandir answered that he knew no way, save to flee as they might from Galrung and escape into the wild. But Ninyel said, The black sword was my beloved and my husband. To seek him only do I go. What else could you think? And she sped on before him. Thus she came towards the crossings of Teglin, and beheld Hod and Eleth in the white moonlight, and great dread came on her. Then with a cry she turned away, casting off her cloak, and fled southward along the river, and her white raiment shone in the moonlight. Thus Brandir saw her from the hillside, and turned to cross her path, but he was still behind her when she came to the ruin of Galrung, nigh the brink of Kabed and Eras. There she saw the dragon lying, but she heeded him not, for a man lay beside him, and she ran to Tarambar and called his name in vain. Then finding that his hand was burned, she washed it with tears, and bound it about with a strip of her raiment, and she kissed him and cried on him again to wake. Thereat Glaurung stirred for the last time ere he died, and he spoke with his last breath, saying, Hail, Nenyor, daughter of Hurin, we meet again ere the end. I give thee joy that thou hast found thy brother at last, and now thou shalt know him, a stabber in the dark, treacherous to foes, faithless to friends, and a curse unto his kin, Turin son of Hurin. But the worst of all his deeds thou shalt feel in thyself. Then Galrung died, and the veil of his malice was taken from her, and she remembered all the days of her life. Looking down upon Turin, she cried, Farewell, O twice beloved, a Turin Turambar Turun Ambartanen, master of doom by doom mastered, O happy to be dead. Then Brandir, who had heard all, standing stricken upon the edge of ruin, hastened towards her, but she ran from him, distraught with horror and anguish, and coming to the brink of Kabed and Eras, she cast herself over, and was lost in the wild water. Hey, Nacho, welcome. So yeah, she remembered that they're actually siblings, and yeah, that sucks. Granted, they didn't grow up together, and they didn't ever know each other as siblings. It's still not cool. But like, you could have just been, oh no, we've done a bad, let's never do that again. Let's just never talk about this, but anyway, she kills herself. Brandir came and looked down and turned away in horror, and though he no longer desired life, he could not seek death in that roaring water. And thereafter no man looked again upon Kabed and Eras, nor would any beast or bird come there, nor any tree grow, and it was named Kabed Niraramarth, the leap of dreadful doom. But Brandir made his way back to Nengirith to bring tidings to the people, and he met Dorlas in the woods and slew him, the first blood that he had ever spilled, and the last. And he came to Nengirith, and men cried to him, Have you seen her? For Ninyel is gone. And he answered, Ninyel is gone forever. The dragon is dead, and Tarambar is dead, and those tidings are good. The people murmured at these words, saying he was crazed, but Brandir said, Hear me to the end. Ninyel the beloved is also dead. She cast herself into Teglin, desiring life no more. For she learned that she was none other than Nenyor, daughter of Hurin of Dorloman, ere her forgetfulness came upon her, and that Tarambar was her brother, Turin, son of Hurin. But even as he ceased and the people wept, Turin himself came before them, for when the dragon died, his swoon left him, and he fell into a deep sleep of weariness. But the cold of the night troubled him, and the hilts of Gurthang drove into his side, and he awoke. Then he saw that one had tended his hand, and he wondered much that he was left none the less to lie upon the cold ground. And he called, and hearing no answer, went in search of aid, for he was weary and sick. But when the people saw him, they drew back in fear, thinking it was his unquiet spirit. And he said, Nay, be glad, for the dragon is dead, and I live. But wherefore have you skirned my counsel, and come into peril? And where is Ninyel? For her I would see. And surely you did not bring her from her home. Then Brandir told him it was so, and Ninyel was dead. But the wife of Dorlas cried out, Nay, Lord, he is crazed, for he came here saying that you were dead, and he called it good tidings, but you live. Then Turambar was wrathful, and believing that Brandir said or did was done in malice towards himself and Ninyel, begrudging their love, he spoke evilly to Brandir. Then Brandir reported all that he had heard, and named Ninyel Ninyor, daughter of Hurin, and he cried out upon Turambar with the last words of Galrung, that he was a curse unto his kin and all that harbored him. Aw, thank you so much. Turambar fell into a fury, for in those words he heard the feet of his doom overtaking him, and he charged Brandir with leading Ninyel to her death, and publishing with delight the lies of Galrung, if indeed he devised them not himself. Then he cursed Brandir and slew him, and fled from the people in the woods. But after a while his madness left him, and he came to Howd and Eleth, and there sat and pondered all his deeds. And he cried upon Findulis to bring him counsel, for he knew not whether he would do now more ill to go to Doriath to seek his kin, or to forsake them forever and seek death in battle. And even as he sat there, Mablung, with a company of grey elves, came over the crossings of Teglin, and he knew Turin and hailed him, and was glad indeed to find him yet living, for he had learned of the coming of Glaurung and the path that led to Brethel, and also heard report the black sword of Nargothrond now dwelt there. Therefore he came to give warning to Turin and help if need be. But Turin said, You come too late, the dragon is dead. Then they marveled and gave him great praise, but he cared nothing for it, and said, This only I ask, give me news of my kin, for in Dorloman I learned they had gone to the hidden kingdom. Then Mablung was dismayed, but needs must tell to Turin how Morwen was lost, and Nenyor cast into a spell of dumb forgetfulness, how she escaped them upon the borders of Doriath and fled northwards. Then at last Turin knew that doom had overtaken him, and he had slain Brandir unjustly, so that the words of Galrung were fulfilled in him. And he laughed as one fey, crying, This is a bitter jest indeed. But he bade Mablung to go and return to Doriath with curses upon it. And a curse too upon your errand, he cried. This only was wanting. Now comes the night. Then he fled from them like the wind, and they were amazed, wondering what madness had seized him. And they followed after him. But Turin far outran them, and came to Cabot and Eris, and heard the roaring water, and saw that all the leaves fell sere from the trees, as though winter had come. There he drew his sword, that now alone remained to him of all his possessions, and said, Hail, Gurthang! No lord or loyalty dost thou know, save the hand that wieldeth thee. From no blood wilt thou shrink. Wilt thou therefore take Turin Tarambar, and wilt thou slay me swiftly? And from the blade rang a cold voice in answer, Yea, I will drink thy blood gladly, so that I may forget the blood of Beleg my master, and the blood of Brandir slain unjustly. I will slay thee swiftly. Then Turin set the hilt upon the ground, and cast himself upon the point of Gurthang, and the black blade took his life. But Mablung and the elves came and looked on the shape of Galrung lying dead, and upon the body of Turin, and they grieved. And when men of Brethel came thither and learned the reasons of Turin's madness and death, they were aghast. And Mablung said bitterly, I also have been meshed in the doom of the children of Hurin, and thus with my tidings have slain one that I loved. Then they lifted up Turin and found that Gurthang had broke asunder. But elves and men gathered there great store of wood and made a mighty burning, and the dragon was consumed to ashes. Turin they laid in a high mound where he had fallen, and the shards of Gurthang were laid beside him. And when all was done, the elves sang a lament for the children of Hurin, and a great grey stone was set upon the mound, and thereon was carven in runes of Doriath, Turin Turambar Dagnir Glaurunga, and beneath they wrote also, Nenyor Ninyel. But she was not there, nor was it ever known whether the cold waves of Teglin had taken her. And that's the end of Turin. Long story short, he was a angry idiot that got a lot of people killed and accidentally slept with his sister by mistake. It's not my favorite story of Tolkien's, but it's also one of the few that he really he took from actual standing mythology and said, I want to take that outline and adapt it to my own universe. Kind of an experiment on his part. The story is adapted further in a much longer book that we may eventually get to. But it's not my favorite. I really like Beren and Luthien a lot better. There's some other stories that are more fun, but I mean, it's part of his universe. Thanks so much for listening to it. Next time, we'll be at Chapter 22, The Ruin of Doriath, working towards the end of the story, the end of the Silmarillion. After that, we'll be taking a little Tolkien break, as it'll probably be around October, and I want to do some spooky stories, so that'll be fun. Thanks for joining me. Thanks so much to, I think it was... I can't see the full name anymore, but Ileani and Daniel for the donations. Thanks to my members, Daniel, Jeff, Phil was here earlier, Leon. Thank you guys for the support and for keeping the channel alive. If you like what I do and you want extra stuff, for as little as 99 cents a month, you can get bonus content, hours of it, relating to readings, poetry, non-fiction discussion stuff, lots of essays, written work, fiction, fan fiction, all kinds of stuff, through Patreon or YouTube. Links are in the description, both to sign up for those and to look at all the benefits you can get. Excuse me. In about an hour, I'll be doing Call of Cthulhu, which is a commission, I think, for Nacho. Hopefully we're finishing today. If you want to commission a game, it's $5 for at least one sit-down sitting of a couple hours of playing the game. Links in the description. I think that's everything. There will be a lesson tomorrow on Taoism, which is going to be fun. And then Friday will be Fanfic Friday. Y'all know how it is. Join the Discord to hang out and play games and stuff. And follow me on social media for other stuff. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.